All right, thank you for sticking around because it's like 5:30 now, and I know a lot of you probably either been here all day or you have a lot better things to do than watch my talk, but thank you for coming and checking this out. So I'm going to wait for my slides to come on here in just a moment. But what we're going to be talking about today may or may not have anything to do with what everyone is here for, because if you're just here part of a DAO, then developer communities might not matter that much to you, but I think a lot of the people that are here are building products, or they're building DAO tooling, or they're just part of a DAO building software, and maybe this will be relevant to you. So my talk is about building high-impact developer communities, and this is the first time I've ever given this talk, but it's something that I've been involved in for most of my career. So my name is Nader. I'm a developer, author, and teacher. As of today, I'm the director of developer relations for Aave and Lens Protocol. Really excited about that. So. And I'm also the founder of Developer DAO. So to understand the importance of developer communities, I think we need to first understand network effects. And when we want to know what network effects means, I went and looked at the definition because I kind of know what it meant. But the definition to me really underscored how important maybe what this is in Web3 and with blockchains in particular. So network effects are a phenomenon where by a product or service gains additional value as more people use it. And in Web3 and blockchain, the networks we're going to talk about become more valuable with more usage. And coming back from open source, which is I am traditionally a Web 2 person. I've been in the Web 2 space for 8 years before joining the blockchain space about a year and a half ago. Network effects in OSS are very, very strong because the more people are building in open source, the more code is being shared, the more people are forking that code and building upon it. And there you have like this snowball or this domino effect. So you end up having a framework like React now being used at every company in the world, but it just started off as a single framework and no one was using it. But when people start building libraries and abstractions on top of it, making it easier, it becomes well-known and it becomes really, really used everywhere. But in blockchain, it's a little bit different, and it's actually a lot more important because in Web3 and in blockchains, the more people building in the ecosystem, the more valuable the actual ecosystem becomes. And we see this in things like these crazy grant programs. And these numbers were taken a few months ago, but there were grant programs that had money up to $1 billion that were given to projects building in their ecosystems. You never see this type of stuff in the software engineering space. You don't see Amazon or Google or Facebook or any of these companies giving this type of money to builders in the space because the incentives are a lot different. But in blockchains, if you have an ecosystem, for example, like Polygon, they now have so much momentum that it is going to be challenging for other, I would say, competitors in a similar space to kind of compete with them, even though there are always new paradigms and things like that. But they've done an incredible job, I think, in building out that ecosystem and kind of getting that network effect. So before I talk about specifics, I want to kind of give you some context about my own personal life. So I want to talk about my own developer journey. This is the most retweeted tweet I've ever tweeted in my entire life because I think it resonated with people because I'm a self-taught developer. I'm a college dropout, but I'm also a high school dropout. And I kind of built a lot of my career just in public. And a lot of people didn't know that when I tweeted it out. And I am a self-taught developer. But when you think about what being a self-taught developer means, how do you actually become a self-taught developer? Well, in reality, I'm not quite self-taught because all of this information came from somewhere, right? But where did this information come from? Well, I want to talk about a talk that really impacted my life and my career as a developer. And it was called Building Bridges, and it was at NG Vegas, which is an Angular conference in Las Vegas, by this guy named Aaron Frost. And in this talk, he had this poem that I'm about to read here called The Bridge Builder. An old man going a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast and wide and deep, through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim, the sullen stream had no fear for him, but he turned around, went safe to the other side, and built a bridge to span the tide. Old man, said a fellow pilgrim near, you're wasting your strength with building here. Your journey will end with the ending day, and you will never again pass this way. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why are you building a bridge at evening tide? And the end of the poem goes like this. The builder lifted his old gray head. Good friend, in the path I have come, he said. There followed after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. This chasm that has been as naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may be a pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I'm building this bridge for him. That really impacted me for some reason. And I sometimes get like emotional reading that just because I have been really affected by those types of bridge builders in my life. So let's talk about building bridges as a developer. How can you actually take this direction and kind of give back as a developer? There's a lot of things you can do. You can be a teacher, speaking at conferences and writing blog posts and stuff like that. You can answer questions on Stack Overflow. You can mentor new developers. You can open source your work. You can blog and create videos and teach people about what you've done. You can share your ideas and opportunities on social media, and you can build developer communities focused on public goods. Kevin Owaki is here. Gitcoin have had a really great impact on me and also Developer DAO by supporting us early on. So building bridges in my career, I created the first Mississippi Tech meetup in 2014 and the first Mississippi coding school that failed. I then helped create a new coding school after that was successful with a lot of other people that are actually involved. I did a lot of React Native stuff on Stack Overflow, and still today I'm #1, even though I haven't touched React Native in a few years. I open sourced something. I wrote blog posts with a lot of views, and then I founded Developer DAO. But what I realized in doing this is that over time, I wasn't actually trying to build a network, but the actual impact, the things that came from doing all this work ended up in a pretty cool network. I started getting people like knowing me, and I'm knowing them and meeting them through all of this content creation and all this stuff that I was doing. So some opportunities started coming my way through this network. I opened a consultancy called React Native Training, where I had different clients like Amazon and Microsoft, and I was teaching them how to build mobile apps. I started getting asked to speak at events. I was asked to write a book. I've had developer relations opportunities, and I started making more money. But what I also realized is that in doing all of this work, your skills actually increase, because when you're teaching someone something, you're actually needing to understand that at a deeper level to explain it. Because sometimes you're using something and you just like assume and you don't really care how something works. But when you're trying to teach someone else, you have to answer these questions that you might not have thought of. So what are some of the communities I've been involved with? React Native community. The one that I spent the most time with up until today is a team called AWS Amplify on AWS, where we built a community of active developers from 3,000 to over 245,000 monthly actives. Scaled it from almost nothing to a multi-billion-dollar business. The Graph protocol, which is a Web3 protocol, Developer DAO, Celestia, and the Jackson, Mississippi meetup that's still running today that I'm not actually personally in charge of. But what I also realized is, as of today, when I was putting my final touches on this talk, when it comes to building high-impact developer communities, the most important component is actually this idea of building bridges. And building bridges should be the core part of your ethos. So this kind of lays, hopefully, the groundwork for the actual content of my talk. That is essentially a framework for building high-impact developer communities. And I want to talk mainly about protocols and companies and products building these communities. But I first want to talk about individuals, because a lot of times you're going to be hiring these individuals to build out these networks. So as an individual, I put together this graphic that I think is a nice hierarchy that is a place for someone to start looking at to kind of understand how to be good at developer relations or building communities. So you have at the ground level, you have expertise. So to be able to teach something, you have to know something or understand it. Once you've gained that expertise, you start creating content. And I hate the word content, but this could be white papers, it could be blog posts, it could be tweets, it could be literally anything. But once you understand something and you start sharing it, then people start knowing who you are and you start gaining credibility. This credibility only comes with this foundation. Once you have credibility and you have content and you have ideas, then you start distributing all of these things. And this distribution actually also somewhat comes naturally. But what you end up with is impact. And it's hard to kind of have impact without having the right foundation. But the main thing I'm going to be talking about today is actually how to build high-impact developer communities for actual communities. or like protocols and things like that. So these are a few different points that I want to kind of talk deeply about. One is obviously you need to build something useful. I say that because a lot of 90% of the shit in Web3 is not useful. Okay, so you really do need something that people want. Number two, you need to have really good docs, because once someone hears about the thing that you've done and they want to kind of use it, if they come to your docs, you've already kind of won. You've won something really big. People do not have a lot of attention these days. So if you can kind of get their intention to come look at your docs, you should close the deal right there. But what happens most of the time is that people have trouble being successful. And what you really only need one thing. You need to have a no-brainer Hello World tutorial or something that is essentially an idiot-proof version of them becoming successful. So you have a good idea, you have a product, you get someone to come to your docs, you convert them and making them successful. Beyond that, though, this is like the core foundation. You then need to have some place for these builders that are starting to use your stuff to kind of talk to each other. I think this is well known at this point. Most people have Discords. That's kind of the place that most people have. And within the Discord, these conversations happen, maybe a Telegram for a smaller project. But beyond that, we're going to talk about strategies I think not a lot of teams take into consideration that they should. First of all, you need to optimize for many-to-many relationships. You can hire people and you can go out and you can give conference talks and stuff, but there's only so much impact that you can have as an individual, because you only are one person. There's only a limited amount of work that you can do as a person. Instead, you should build out an army of people that are advocating on your behalf, because instead of having one person teaching 100 people, you might have 100 people teaching 100 people, turning those 100 people into advocates as well. And then you have this exponential effect on your community growth. And the way that you do that is by identifying and incentivizing the superstars within your community. Superstars can be basically incentivized, I guess, in these different ways. You can have ambassador programs where you give someone a label that they can then use on their resume, and it provides them some clout, I guess you could say. You can create private Telegram groups that really make them feel special, and you invite people that are doing cool stuff into that private group, and you have VIPs in there to help them out. And it's a really cool thing that I just now started seeing done in the past year working in Web3 that I think a lot of teams are starting to do. And this is really smart. You also can invite these people to events, and you can sponsor their travel and stuff like that. You can share their wins publicly by high-profile people within your own company and your own community. A good example of this is actually Stanley with Lens Protocol. When I started building on Lens, he would actually retweet me, and he's the founder of the company. And I've been doing stuff all the time, and I rarely see that type of engagement from anyone. But it really made me feel appreciated. And people want to feel appreciated, because they sometimes spend days or weeks building stuff. And if you just ignore them or something, it's a very light amount of work to encourage them. And then, sending them swag, a lot of people kind of already know that, but maybe consider actually hiring these people. And you don't have to hire them full time. You can maybe extend contracts to them to encourage them to do more work. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the idea of contracting as a service as opposed to full-time DevRel. So what are the types of people that could be considered superstars? Open source developers, people building software out of your software, I guess, and open sourcing it. People creating blog posts, books, and things like that, or YouTube videos. Trusted developers with large networks. I hate using the word influencer because an influencer doesn't really mean anything, but there are people within the community that have a large network that are trusted that could be considered influencers that you should actually consider working with. Speakers and teachers, and then successful teams building with your product. Another thing that you might consider as a general strategy is helping developers where they are. And most importantly, even if they're not building with your product. This flies against the face of 90% of the companies that I've talked to and 90% of the people that I work with. And this is actually a really simple thing to do that will immediately set you apart from everyone else. What most people do is they spend 100% of their time shilling their own shit. And when people kind of see that you're only talking about your own thing, you lose credibility. And literally the only thing that you should be caring about beyond having a good product is your credibility. Because if you're going to be talking about the things that you're doing, people aren't going to listen to you if they don't find you credible. But finding opportunities to help people regardless of what they're doing, and then at the time that is right, when they are interested in the thing that you're doing, you can then extend an opportunity to work with your team or whatever, and then it actually means something because you haven't been shilling your shit the entire time. Instead, you've been genuinely trying to be helpful. Now, this might be like a no-brainer to people that are like, I don't know, good people, but in reality, companies don't do this that often. But it's really an important thing to keep in mind. Also, being transparent about the trade-offs. If someone asks you, is your product right for them? You shouldn't always say yes, because a lot of times it's not right. And instead, you should be knowledgeable about everything else in the ecosystem. And number 6, that last point that I was talking about, will give you that knowledge, because if you're kind of helping people, you'll understand other things that are happening. And basically, don't be a shill, yeah. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about is contracting out your weaknesses. I think what we're starting to see is that the value of developer communities and developer relations is becoming so high that there is just not enough there aren't enough people out there to provide the services that are needed. Therefore, you have literally hundreds of teams hiring for developer relations, and there are only a handful of good developer relations people to fill those. So you have a lot of people looking for people that don't actually have people to hire them. So you end up having higher and higher salaries, but also you have teams that just don't have anyone to work. So instead of looking for someone full-time that does YouTube and Twitter and like blogging and social media and events, it's impossible for most teams to do that. Instead, you should find 1 or 2 good people that have strengths, and anything that they're not good at, you hire contractors, because you can pay them $5,000, $10,000 a month. You can fire them immediately if they're not delivering. You don't have any obligation. But you can also go and find a YouTuber. You can find a writer. You can find whatever. And you can just pay them monthly. It's actually a lot less expensive even. And I think that a lot of teams are starting to realize this, but a lot of them actually are not. Anyway, so that wraps it up. I just want to say thank you for checking out my talk. Does anyone have any questions, by the way?
Hey, so I love your second point as well as the 6th one. And my question to you is, like, as a developer advocate myself, I always hit the issue of like trying to build a bridge and meeting people where they're at, because in a lot of developer communities, they're trying to learn, but it's like they're most communities want people to be at a 5, when it's like, no, we need to bridge them over to be from 0 to 5 for it to take off. So is there any strategies or any like tips you can give in terms of how can I like bridge that gap and like as least resistance as possible? Yeah, I can get them from 0 to 5, but it's just like that barrier. Like, for instance, when I work on a project, it's like, all right, well, let's get them from 0 to 5. No, we need to be at a 5. Like, how do you prevent that roadblock from happening as you're trying to do your day-to-day?
So I'm hoping I understood your question properly. I think it comes down to having really good educational resources that really span the whole spectrum of very, very beginner level all the way to advanced and everything in between. And you kind of would brainstorm with your team, and you would actually reach out to the community and come up with a list of like 20 or 30 ideas. You would then take some time and actually rank those and least the most important, and then you would go and just create all of that content. And you probably want it in your docs and also publicly. And I think like you would just point those people to that, and then you would have people that are available to take questions and help them if they ran into any issues maybe. But
thanks so much for giving this talk. A lot of these decentralized networks are incredibly generalized in their capacity. And I see a lot of developer-oriented content that focuses on specific ideas and things that can be built with these tools. How important do you think it is for networks to also build or fund like opinionated SDKs and tooling that sits on top of the generalized protocol? And does that belong in is that the core team's responsibility? Is it the community's responsibility? How do you think about that tooling abstraction layer as it relates to this whole momentum?
Yeah, I think the answer obviously is it depends. I hate to say that, but But I do think that it plays a huge role. And I think one good example of this that I'll speak to, because I've been considering it already for Lens Protocol, is that it uses GraphQL, and GraphQL is really great. But the types of queries that you can throw at Lens sometimes have 200 or 300 or 400 different lines that you can return. And for a new developer coming in, even though you can just copy and paste and it works, that's just a lot of code. So what we were thinking of doing is like creating an SDK that kind of wraps all of that GraphQL, and you just pass in an object, and the object then returns. So okay, let's say we wanted to create something like that. I think it would make a lot of sense to fund that from outside of the company. Let someone else build that, see how high quality it becomes, and if it becomes high quality enough, either consider continuing to fund and incentivize that person, or maybe even hire them, and then just have discussion about bringing it into your own docs. So a good example of something like that that's in the wild is Next.Auth. So Next.js is a framework that you probably everyone might be aware of. Everyone's using it. Someone created an authentication framework called Next.Auth. It lives outside of Next.js, but they've had a lot of support from Next.js, but it's never been rolled into the actual company. And it's become really successful as an outside project. And I think the less work that you put on the development team while still maintaining high quality APIs and SDKs outside makes a lot of sense. But again, it kind of just depends, yeah. Sorry about that.
Thanks very much. Wonderful topic, and not so simple topic. And maybe you answered, and you talked about these items, but maybe I'm helping to contribute to a small project called ZK Maps, and we're kind of just transitioning from simple POC to creating a tool for others. So of course, there's so many things that we need to do from the docs in the community, and a lot of things, but maybe kind of another emphasis about that jump from a product to something that serves others.
Okay, so you're curious about the 0 to 1 from creating a product to bootstrapping a community? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there for sure, but I think that by having a good product, you next want to have really, really good docs. Once you have good docs, you want to do almost like a shotgun campaign of awareness. And you want to be literally everywhere you possibly can be. You want to be at as many high impact events that make as possible. But I think even more scalable is actually doing digital content. So a good strategy there is finding people that have an existing network and doing, again, that many to many, or that maybe this would be more like a one to many type of deal. But you would say, okay, this person has 20,000 YouTube subscribers. This person has 50,000 followers. You would find as many of those people as possible, try to find some way to work with them and share their network. And then therefore you're kind of not having to go out there and reach 1 million people specifically on your own, but instead you might say 5 or 10 or 15 good relationships will help you kind of get the word out there. I mean, but really that's one of the different things. To me, it's kind of like this, shotgun approach where you're trying to do blog posts, videos. You want to be on social media. You want to do everything you possibly can for maybe a year. And then you start building up this momentum. And then from there, you can kind of take a step back, see where you're at. But yeah, I think it's just a lot of grinding and a lot of hard work. There's so many projects and teams that are competing with each other right now. It's hard to stand out. Everyone knows that attention is the most valuable resource right now, and it's very hard to get that. So the strategy that's worked for me is literally just busting your ass kind of for about a year and then seeing what happens. But obviously doing things that are high quality.
Hello, yes, I have a question. Maybe there is not a right answer for this, but what is the percentage that a project should assign from the budget to develop the community?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think there should be a budget that's just set aside that is used for events. It's used for paying people in the community in the form of grants, and it just really depends on the budget that team has. It's hard to put a number on it, but it should be pretty high, because if you start thinking about traditional marketing, which doesn't work at all for developers, I was in situations at companies, again, like AWS, they would put millions of dollars on Google ads. But when I asked for them $1 million, asked to take $1 million and give it to this program that we had called Community Builders, it literally didn't even get considered. But that $1 million would have probably had 1,000 times more impact in that community, but it was so against their way of thinking, they didn't even consider it. So like, they're literally guerrilla marketing tactics that aren't even that guerrilla marketing because they're just so clear, but like, they're just not, people aren't just used to them yet. And if you can find those that other people haven't yet discovered, you could call it a hack. And if you kind of find those and take advantage of them before anyone else does, then that's kind of like, you know, the bread and butter of maybe getting ahead of your competitors. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much.